Hi everyone, great to see you all this afternoon and welcome to this webinar on supporting young people's mental health and wellbeing through online music education, which is part of this fantastic Connect Resound Learning Festival that has been going on this week. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you find this session useful and enjoyable. It's great to be able to bring people together in an online space and to learn, and this session will be recorded so it can be shared afterwards. So this session is to really help us think about the role of music in a post-COVID recovery curriculum context, and the format is that we're going to hear from two experts, Emily and then Simon, on children and young people's mental health and well-being. So they'll do a talk and then there'll be some space after their talk for some specific questions. We may have a little bit of space for questions right at the end. If you have any technical problems or if you want to pop anything in the chat, please do use that function. As Grace said, either to everybody, panelists and attendees, or if you want to just get my or Grace's attention, just pop it in the panelists box. This is a learning space and I want you all to feel comfortable to be able to voice your perspectives and opinions, whatever they are. We will be moderating the chat, and if any comments do become offensive or disruptive, then we will contact you privately about that, although I don't envisage that happening. This event, as Grace said, is being live captioned and recorded, and it will be available afterwards on the YouTube channel. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to our first speaker. I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of the speakers today. So I'd like to introduce and welcome Emily Volks, who is a practitioner, researcher, trainer, charity director and MA course leader, has many, many hats. And she is going to be sharing trauma and mental health informed approaches in participatory music education. So I will hand over with pleasure to Emily. Thanks ever so much, Emily.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks so much. And thank you for having me this afternoon and for inviting me to present at your fantastic event. I was at something the other day and people were engaging really well. It seemed like a lovely atmosphere in the festival. So congratulations to all involved. So this afternoon, I'm attempting to smush about a 5-week course into a 35-minute session. I'd be really happy for you to put your cameras on, actually, because it's nice to see faces, if that's okay with you. Obviously don't if you would rather not, but I'd love to see you. So thanks, Simon. Great. So I'm going to share my screen and take you through a presentation. And as I said, I tend to get a little bit overexcited and try and think that I can cover probably more than I can in the time we've got. So I will do my best. And I'm hoping that we'll cover a little bit about mental health, about trauma and the impact of adverse childhood experiences, and then look at how we might use that information, that learning, that science, the neuroscience, in order to build trauma-informed principles and practices in our work with children and young people through music. So actually the first thing that I'd like you to do is to use the chat function, and I'd like you to, if you were a genre of music, if you could express how you're feeling right now in a genre of music, could you type that into the chat box, please? Don't overthink it. Don't tell me what your favourite genre of music is. I want to know what you're feeling. If you were to express your feelings right now as a genre of music, what would that be without overthinking it? Gut response. I can't see the chat. Disco, we've got ambient, good, nice calm there, blues, techno, indie folk. Excellent. So, sorry, I have to stop sharing the screen so that I can see those. Thank you. If we had more time, we would explore why we do that, and I'd invite you to reflect on that. But essentially, what we're doing is we're immediately going into metaphor, which takes us into the right side of the brain. So this is where we can really connect with creativity, with our body, with empathy. It's moving away from the more rational left brain, moving into the right brain, using metaphor, which is indeed what we're doing through making music. So that's the way that I like to engage with groups, is using, what kind of weather are you today? How would you describe yourself if you could describe yourself as a weather or an animal? Anything that takes you into that right brain. So mental health, just briefly, and again I would love to explore this in more detail, but just thinking about mental health, and the World Health Organization says that mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And Mind say that good mental health means generally being able to think, feel and react in the ways that you need and want to live your life. So just helpful to just frame that in terms of what we understand by mental health. In terms of statistics, now I'm sure these are probably rather different, and I have done some research on the impacts of COVID, but I won't be sharing that today. But we know that roughly 1 in 4 adults are affected by a mental health problem, typically anxiety or depression. Mental health challenges are on the rise amongst children and young people, and that is going to be significantly more as a result of COVID. And here's a really key one for you: life expectancy. For people with mental health disorders, so more serious mental health disorders, the life expectancy is 19.1 years less for men and 16.1 years less for women. So that's a really quite a startling piece of information there. So trauma. What is trauma? We often think of trauma being an event, something that's happened to us, which, you know, is true, but actually trauma originates as a response in the nervous system. It does not originate in an event. Trauma is in the nervous system, not the event. And this is the work of Peter Levine. I suggest if you're interested in reading more about trauma, I'd really recommend this book, Waking the Tiger. Essentially, we have evolved, our brains have evolved so that we override and we stop ourselves from completing the trauma cycle. So what we see in animals is that when they're in a life risky situation, they're about to be eaten by another animal, you will see them go through the fight, flight, freeze response, and then you'll see a discharge of energy. You'll see a physical response, which is discharging the energy that's built up as a result of that event. What we do as humans, because we've evolved a frontal cortex, we stifle that, and therefore the build-up of the toxic stress that's caused as a result of those events gets stuck in the nervous system. Peter Levine says that trauma is perhaps the most avoided, ignored, belittled, denied, misunderstood and untreated cause of human suffering. Although it is the source of tremendous distress and dysfunction, it is not an ailment or a disease, but the byproduct of an instinctively instigated, altered state of consciousness. We enter this state, let us call it survival mode, when we perceive that our lives are being threatened. If we are overwhelmed by the threat and are unable to successfully defend ourselves, we can become stuck in survival mode. This highly aroused state is designed solely to enable short-term defensive actions, but left untreated over time, it begins to form the symptoms of trauma. So adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs study. So this was quite a significant study that took place in the 90s, so it's still a relatively recent study, and it was over 17,000 people took part in this piece of research. And essentially, what was found out was that the more adverse childhood experiences a person had, the more likely they were to go on to develop mental health disorders, physical health conditions, and premature death. If we think back to that earlier statistic about life expectancy, we can then start to see the link. And so the World Health Organization has now recognized that adverse childhood experiences are a leading determinant of some of the most common forms of physical illness, mental illness, and premature death. Bessel van der Kolk, another great author on this subject. The Body Keeps the Score, another really great read if you're interested in this. The impact of trauma over time can result in poor physical and mental health as the build-up of toxic stress is held in the body. Unresolved trauma is the root cause of anxiety and depression. Blocked grief, essentially, is the root cause of anxiety and depression. Just taking a look, so you can Google the ACE questionnaire. It's a 10-point questionnaire that you can take a look at, and you basically come up with an ACE score of potential things that could happen in your childhood. Things like parents separating, domestic violence, domestic drug use, sort of significant events that can happen. So with 4 or more ACEs, an ACE score of 4 or more, an individual is 2.5 times more likely to develop COPD, 4.5 times more likely to develop depression, 3 times more likely to get cancer, and 12 times more likely to be suicidal. And I should say that this ACE study, the 17,000 people that took part, were not people living in challenging circumstances in deprived neighbourhoods. They were predominantly middle class, college-educated people that took part in this questionnaire, in this survey, and similar studies have been replicated in other areas and found very, very similar results. So what's happening when we look at our children and young people is that having lived in adverse experiences, or having had them, or being in them still, their nervous systems and their bodies are flooded with cortisol, mainly cortisol, the stress hormone. And for some children and young people, this has been likened to the same level in soldiers returning from war who have been diagnosed with PTSD. PTSD has only actually very recently been added to the list of diagnosable mental health disorders. It's still relatively new in that respect. But that's what we're looking at. That's what we're talking about with children walking around with that level of toxic stress in their systems. What this impacts on is their frontal lobe functioning. So we talk about the frontal. I'm putting my hand up if you can see me. We're going to come to this in a moment, but we use a hand model for the brain, and with the frontal lobes, this is where we are able to learn and focus and concentrate. And what's happening is that children have got poor frontal lobe functioning, which means that they will struggle to feel connected with their body, to feel empathy, to be able to concentrate, to sit down and to listen. They become overactive. They have a hypervigilant social defense system, constantly alert for signs of threat. So that's called neuroception. So it's more than just seeing something, it's sensing something. They're constantly on alert with every fibre of their being in that state of hypervigilance. The amygdala, which is in the limbic system, so is it in the sort of more primitive part of the brain, becomes triggered more easily when we're in this state, and this is what leads to the production of the stress hormones, and then results in uncontrollable actions, including poor behaviour, acts of rage and violence. And connected to the frontal lobes, the frontal cortex, this is where our executive functions mainly sit within the brain. So this is our ability to handle stress, to be able to think and concentrate, our confidence and self-esteem, interpersonal skills and emotional literacy. So all of these executive functions will be significantly impacted for a child who has lived with adverse childhood experiences and has that poor frontal lobe functioning. So here we are. Here's the brain model, and you're more than welcome to go through this with me if you like. It's a very simple, simplistic model of the brain, just looking at the 3 core parts. So the survival brain is our brain stem, which is in our wrist, which is basically our oldest part of the brain. The limbic system, so if we wrap the thumb round, is our next evolved part of the brain, which is associated with emotions, primal emotions, and this is where the amygdala, which is our smoke alarm, that's where that sits. And then wrapping the fingers round, this is our rational brain. Dan Siegel calls this the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, and where the term comes from, flipping your lid. We've literally flipped our lid and we've gone into a place, and I'm sure we can all think of a time when that has happened, where we've been unable to rationalise, we've just been caught up in a completely, and it's a full body response that takes us into that flipping the lid into our limbic system. I hope this is all making sense so far. I think it's really important to underline the theory, because otherwise talking about trauma-informed practice doesn't really make sense. I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, because if we had time we would explore a lot more about polyvagal theory, but you probably have heard of the fight, flight and freeze responses. So essentially that is what's happening when we're flipping the lid. We're going into one of these responses, and I've left this on here because I think it's really helpful to look at the words and think about maybe some of what you might see in a room, what you might see in terms of behaviours. It's the children and young people that are in the fight or flight, the sympathetic part of the nervous system, that we tend to notice. But it's when the freeze response kicks in that is more worrying, because that's where children can kind of appear to be okay, but actually they're dissociated. These children and young people are the ones that may probably move towards things like self-harm as a way of trying to feel something. So that's they can sometimes sort of slip into being unnoticed. And so in terms of polyvagal theory, what we're aiming to do is to try and bring people into a state of social engagement. So Stephen Porges calls this the social engagement. Is the ventral part of our nervous system, which is linked to our parasympathetic nervous system, which is about calming. And in this space, in this branch of our nervous system, we can be grounded, we can be calm, we can be open, we can be curious. Having a safe, so Bessel van der Kolk says, having a safe haven promotes self-reliance and instills a sense of sympathy and helpfulness to others in distress. From the intimate give and take of the attachment bond, children learn that other people have feelings and thoughts that are both similar and different from theirs. They get in sync with their environment and with people around them, and develop self-awareness, empathy, impulse control, and self-motivation that make it possible to become contributing members of the larger social culture. So the importance of social engagement, and usually we need somebody else to do that with. We need somebody else to be alongside, to co-regulate. So I'll come back to some of that. So trauma-informed. So what we know now about the brain is that it's plastic. Plasticity of the brain, we know, and again, this is relatively new knowledge. The 1960s, we started to understand that the brain isn't fixed. It's never too late to build new neural pathways and to strengthen the frontal cortex of the brain. So we can do that at any stage in our lives. Throughout the life course, we can do that, which is fantastic news. And I love this quote from Dan Siegel: where attention goes, neural firing flows and neural connection grows. So by understanding trauma and understanding a bit about the neuroscience, we can really change the brain chemistry and even the brain structure at any point. Coming back to social engagement and assisting where we can to bring people into that ventral vagal state. And for this, we require safety cues. And the biggest one is tone of voice. So prosody. Prosody communicates what's beneath the words, the intent of the speaker. It's not what you say, it's the way that you say it, which I'm pretty sure might be a song. But it really is about how we use our language. If we think about babies, and communication is built on what's called motherese, which is that sing-songy, the prosody that we use in our voice is a really important building block for communication, but not just for communication, for relationships, for building reciprocity, for give and take, for empathy. Stephen Porges says that without thinking, we analyse vocal intonations, the muscles around the eyes, and reciprocity during listening. Our ears literally open up when we're in a heartfelt place and close when we're under stress. Have you ever been in such a stressful situation that you literally can't hear, or you can only hear bits of things? Things go muffled, because the first thing that we need to engage with for social engagement is the ears. It's when we hear prosaic words, warm and melodic intonations, the muscles in the ears relax, and then the muscles in the eyes and the face, and then our breath deepens, and then we kind of go into a more relaxed state. So it starts with the ears. The importance of being face-to-face, and body language, eye contact, facial expressions, particularly around the eyes, and validation, empathy, and being fully present. So these are real, practical things that we can really think about in terms of safety cues, especially for somebody that's gone into a complete flipping their lid. And it might be that actually going up to them face to face and getting eye contact is going to make them feel more threatened. So it's just about how you gently do that. Maybe it's to begin with from the other side of the room, and then you can gently come in closer. It's just gauging it in the moment. So some of the models that we adopt for trauma-informed practice is the work of Panksepp. So yeah, Panksepp he's no longer with us, but he's a neuroscientist who devoted his entire life to understanding emotions. He did most of his experiments were on rats, and if you Google him and look up the rat tickler, you'll find little videos of him he tickling rats, and they giggled. Rats giggled when they were tickled. But he essentially discovered that there are some core primal emotions that represent as systems within the brain. And here I'm just going to look at the pro-social systems, but there are the social defense systems as well within his model. But for this, we're just going to focus on the 3 pro-social systems. So that's the play, seeking, and care systems. So we're thinking about how we might embed activities that really build in these 3 important systems. And then we underpin with the PACE model, Dan Hughes PACE, which is play, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Empathy being sensitive to the felt meanings which flow in the other person. And you can see the importance of play. I can't underline that enough. We see it here twice in these, in both of these models. So this is what we would refer to as top-down pathways. So we're really using these models to focus on building the frontal lobes in a top-down approach. But then you might hear a term bottom-up. So we couple this with bottom-up approaches, which is somatic, body-focused. And so we refer to embodiment. And embodiment, well, there's 3 aspects to this. So Interoception is our external senses: heat, touch, sound, taste. Just being really aware of sensations external to us, which actually, for some children and young people who are highly traumatized, they won't have that. They won't necessarily have that. The same for interoception, what's going on inside our body, being aware of whether we're hungry or whether we're hot or whether we're cold, or aware of our heart rate. Again, traumatized children might not notice that they're cold because they've lost that sense of interoception. And then proprioception is our sense of where we are in space. So being able to close your eyes and, touch your toe, or, just having that sense of where you are in the space around you. So embodiment is the combined experiences of sensations, emotions, and movement impulses in the present moment. And so it's an integration of these 3 aspects of embodiment. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there. So PACE, play. It doesn't mean being silly, and it requires a careful and well-timed intervention, but playfulness can really break the ice. It can really de-escalate a situation, but it has to be kind of done at the right time in the right way. Acceptance, this is pushing aside all of our own beliefs, being absolutely fully accepting, even if it does go against your own values, accepting that that's the truth of that person in front of you, even if they're telling you that they want to, you know, kill their brother and they've seriously thought about doing it. You can't say, well, no, you mustn't do that. You have to fully accept that that is where they are. Having an open curiosity, so reducing the number of questions, so using sentences that start with, I'm wondering why, you know, why you're walking around with your shoes undone, or why you're walking around in your bare feet, or gosh, I imagine that, you know, it must have been really hard for you, or I'm noticing that you've got quite a lot of, you know, energy today. I'm kind of wondering about that, and, you know, really noticing that. So framing your questions in a different way. I didn't give very good examples there, but you get the idea that instead of why are you doing that, what's going on, how are you, it floods us with this panic of having to answer questions, which is why at the beginning I asked you, instead of how are you, it's if you were a weather today, or if you were a type of music today, what are you? Because it taps into that other side of the brain and empathy there. So being absolutely with that person where they are. So a little bit about music. There was a study that was with infants, and they found that singing to the infants delayed the onset of infant distress more than speech. And the researchers there felt that it was perhaps the temporal patterning with regular beat, metrical organisation and tempo that played an important role in inhibiting stress, perhaps by promoting entrainment and predictive listening. And Colwyn Trevarthen has also written a lot on this subject, and he writes that the brain coordinates rhythmic body movements and guides them to act in sympathy with other people's brains. Infants hear and learn musicality from their mother's talk even before birth. So coming back to that notion of motherese and the prosody in the voice, releasing opioids in the ears. And Bruce Perry, this is one of my favourite quotes. He says, the only way to move from these super high anxiety states, when you flip your lid, to calmer, more cognitive states is rhythm. Patterned, repetitive, rhythmic activity, which is basically what we do with music. It is music. He says that that's the only way, really, to make your brain accessible to relational reward and cortical thinking. So we have this absolute gift of working with music. And Deb Dana says that you can sink into and even savour the suffering of the sympathetic and dorsal vagal moments that otherwise are too intense and overwhelm the system. When the music matches the mood, the autonomic resonance makes it possible for them to safely touch their suffering. So she's talking here about polyvagal, but also about how music provides a safety net, a safe space to be able to touch suffering, to be able to be safely held in emotions of suffering. So that's another really lovely, powerful quote, I think. So, trauma-informed principles, and again, I'm sorry, this is hurtling through what I would normally cover in about a 5-week course, but connection and attunement, that connect is the absolute fundamental first point, and if we haven't got that, we can't move into anything else. If we're not in a neuroception of safety, we're unlikely to be able to create, to engage. So it's called social buffering. So if we can be that adult that can be really connected and attuned, when we feel heard and our feelings validated, it can have a really profound positive effect. It's important to set boundaries and expectations with children and young people who have experienced trauma and adverse childhood experiences. They absolutely need to know, when am I going to see you? How long am I going to get? When is it going to end? You know, they absolutely need that structure, and they need to know. So when, you know, planning for an ending, making sure that they really know that that's coming. Body focus, so being embodied, so coming back to that, kind of really developing all those senses, external and internal senses, and how we can do that creatively with music. Playful, play and co-creation. So being playful is one thing, but play, using games, games that you co-produce and create together, that have rules that you make up. You can make them very musical. This is not to be underestimated. The act of play and creating games creates so many skills. It's the reciprocity, the give and take, cause and effect, negotiation, listening, empathy. There's so much that can be done through just creating a musical game. Rhythm and repetition, we've talked about this in that Bruce Perry quote, that we really love, and our nervous system really does love the comfort of repetition and rhythm. And so I've worked with children who have wanted to sing the same song over and over and over again, and that's absolutely fine, because that's what their nervous system is needing. We need to be flexible and adaptable in our pedagogy and be willing to, rip up a plan and go with a completely different plan. This is a concept that I've been really sort of developing in my work, this idea of balancing or mapping the energy. So making sure that we're being responsive, but that we are going through a journey of both calming and energizing. Making music is proven to be both energizing and calming. And in my research, I found people report feeling relaxed and energized at the same time. So it's just kind of how we carefully map a session so that we have that outcome. Being open and non-judgmental and having curiosity rather than asking lots of questions, and ensuring that what we're delivering is relevant and respectful. Offering opportunities for reward, reflection and consolidation. This is also really important, but reward needs to be relevant to the young person and to what they've done. So it's just making sure that that's a suitable reward, not here you go, here's a trip on a cruise for you. It might be a certificate, or it might be just that they get to finish off the session playing on their favourite instrument. Or but it's also really important to help to build those reflection skills, so enabling them to be able to reflect on what they've achieved in their own words, and then helping them to consolidate that. And making sure that we leave the session regulated, and for most children and young people who have experienced trauma and adverse childhood experiences, they must learn regulation by co-regulation. It's not something that we just know how to do, just like empathy isn't something that we just automatically get. We have to be shown, we have to be taught, we have to co-regulate before we can regulate ourselves. And so I've just basically boiled down what is within the model that I've created, which has got these three components. So connect being the kind of foundation, that we have to have that connection before we can then create and be creative, and then be able to consolidate on all levels. So those are the three kind of main components, which we would go into in more detail if we had masses of more time. And I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was just so much brilliant information in your talk, and so really being able to relate it to practice, which I'm sure people will find really helpful. I just want to open it out if anybody has got any questions for Emily or comments, or whether anything that you've heard in Emily's talk today you can relate to with the children and young people that you may work with. Please do, either if you want to unmute, raise your hand, or put something in the Q&A or the chat box. So we've got a few minutes now for questions. I mean, Emily, I think I'm quite interested just in terms of kicking off, what impact you think that the pandemic has had, and how is it possible to do some of these strategies that you've shared in an online context, whether you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think surprisingly you can make a connection online, and so we have been able to deliver some activity online, and it has been quite surprising actually, in terms of the impact that it can have. And I think going back, I mean, we're gradually now going back into schools, and I think what we're seeing is that even little children now have got, it's been so ingrained that they're not allowed to touch, they're not allowed to get near people. So it's that we've got to kind of break through that that fear of connection. You know, again, I think we're going to have a big job, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, do you have any examples of best practice? You know, I mean, it's in terms of working with emotional trauma and well-being for young people. Are there any sort of organisations or individuals to signpost people towards, you know, really kind of what this looks like in practice, I suppose?
Well, I mean, if we had got more time, I would have shared more kind of case studies, sort of examples. I mean, we're a trauma-informed organisation, and many of our practitioners have gone through a 10-day training course on this, which I now deliver, which is through Trauma Informed Schools UK. But I've now designed training that's more specifically for music practitioners, because that training kind of goes into sand tray work and clay work, you know, which is great tools for teachers to have, but isn't necessarily relevant for music practitioners. So I've sort of identified a bit of a gap and have been delivering training specifically for singing teachers, because the voice is such a powerful tool for expressing trauma, expressing, releasing, and healing trauma through the voice. But rhythm, I mean, something that works incredibly well is just, and will stop children in their tracks, is just get them to do the heartbeat on their chest. I mean, yeah, that works absolute wonders. So drumming and rhythm and movement is so powerful. Yeah, I don't know what else to.
No, that's really helpful. And you know, and there's just, I mean, you know, your talk, it's, and as we know, there are so many benefits, and I think especially over the next few years, you know, as you've identified, and as we know, you know, the work of Professor Barry Carpenter and sort of identifying things around some of the challenges that we might see with children and young people presenting over the next few years. I mean, have you got any views on how we can really communicate those benefits to the, you know, to the people who are trying to cut funding for music?
I know it's really hard. Well, we deliver some of this through our music education hub. So we deliver a one-to-one program, and what we'd really love to do as we sort of take that further is to sort of design training or resources that could really help other people. I think one of the absolute fundamentals for how our work is successful is that it's embedded in the setting, in the schools mainly, and that we've got buy-in from the staff in the schools. That's where it's worked really well, is if we've got those connections with the school, with the relevant staff, and then sometimes with parents as well. That's where it has been absolutely life-changing. So, for example, one child that one of my practitioners worked with, it came out in the sessions that he was actually a young carer, and you know, for his father, and he hadn't realised, and nobody had really realised, and that he was living in fear that his father was going to die because of his ill health. And yet in the classroom, the teacher was just saying, oh, well, he just keeps looking out the window and he's just not focusing. And then what really came out through the music sessions was this anger and this grief, you know, and it just came out in a really body full-on way. It gives me goosebumps. I wasn't even there, but you know, it really gives me goosebumps thinking about it. But it was the relationship then with the practitioner and the school staff, and then being able to bring in the parents, and then that child was then, he was much happier, it was acknowledged, it was spoken about, he'd been helped to understand, and then he was engaged, he got involved in a young carers group and met other children that were in a similar situation. So that's an ideal situation, is where we can really embed it within the kind of pastoral care within the school.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. I mean, and that's just one example, isn't it? You know, I mean, there are so many children and young people who need to have that sort of approach. Well, look, oh, sorry, Emily, were you going to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that we've been trained in the kind of reflect side of things, so how to help children with that. But I think for a lot of music practitioners, they may not know how to kind of deal with those kind of big, you know, disclosures, if you like. So it's making sure that you've got the signposting and the networks around you so that you can you can take that further. And one of the things about setting out the expectations and boundaries is making sure that children are very clear that although this is a space for them to express and to be open, but if we suspect that there's anything that they might be at risk of, or anybody else might be at risk of harm, that we have to pass that on. So we're very clear with anyone that we work with that that's the case. And so it might be that, yeah, sometimes things are just too big for a practitioner to be able to, it goes beyond their role.
And I think you're right, the implication for training, again, over the next few years for anybody working with children and young people through music is huge, isn't it, in terms of, the sorts of young people, the sorts of ways that they might need to be helping children and young people. But Emily, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. We haven't got any questions, but I think if everyone's just like me, I just absorbed so much of that, and I need to go away and process it and think about it. So if anyone does think of any questions for Emily or comments, please do put them in the chat. We might have a little bit of time to sort of reflect at the end. But thank you, Emily. That was incredible, and it leads really nicely into our next speaker, Simon Glennister, who also I know sort of works with many agencies working around young people. So Simon's director of Noise Solution, and he's going to be talking about their wellbeing and interactive music mentoring platform for vulnerable young people. So Simon, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just reflecting on those trauma-informed principles, Emily, and I can see them mirrored across all of the work that we do. But it was really nice to see it in that new way. I haven't seen it laid out in that way, and I think one of the things that happens a lot when you are involved in theoretical perspectives around well-being or mental health, you just see these echoes across all the different theories. There are so many sort of universal truths that I think we tap into. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to give you a bit of context about myself and the work that Noise Solution does. I'll show you some examples. I'm going to talk specifically around well-being, because that's the focus of the work that we do at Noise Solution. And I will talk a little bit about some theory as well. And you can try and spot and see where the similarities are with the stuff Emily was talking about and the stuff that I'll be talking about are. And then I might talk a little bit about the sort of digital capture of impacts, which I think, speaking to your point, Abby, around how do we convince people of the validity and the efficacy of what we do, I think that's very, very much tied up in impact capture and analysis. My dog is going mental in the background. No, anyway, never mind. Right, joys of home working. Right, bit of context. So yeah, my name's Simon. I set up Noise Solution about 10 years ago, having worked a lot in local authority roles with young people in very challenging circumstances. So kids dealing with homelessness and addiction, just coming out of jail, trying to create spaces where those kids could progress into education, training, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of stuff about that work that was really, really fantastic and great. But there was also a lot of it that was really, really appalling in the way that statutory services work with young people who are dealing with all sorts of different challenges. So Noise Solution was kind of a mixture of the two, taking the good and leaving the bad, hopefully. What I found did work was to create spaces where kids felt they were good at something. Actually creating a space where somebody started to believe in themselves. I'm going to have to stop the dog. It's going absolutely mental. If you can literally just give me... It stopped. Excellent. No, it started again. That's really disconcerting. Yeah, what did work was creating spaces where kids felt they were good at something. What didn't work was often local authorities or mental health teams or schools were often, and still are in my experience, very, very focused on deficits and what the issues and problems are for young people. And you'll see when I talk about my model why that can actually be a problem. So Noise Solution's a digital youth work organisation. and we use music as a vehicle within that. We've been reasonably successful. So for the last 2 years at least, we have been recognised as one of the UK's top 100 performing social enterprises, and we are heavily invested in the use of digital to do that. What we actually do, so you know, is we receive referrals from mental health teams or schools or social work teams to work with young people that those teams might be struggling to engage with. Engagement and playfulness, Emily, is the thing that we use to engage these young people. Presenting as a musician rather than a social worker or a care coordinator is a much less threatening way of engaging with young people who've often had negative experiences of cyclically being involved in those agency kind of scenarios. So let me actually show you a little bit of what some playfulness and co-creation and repetitive beats looks like in a noise solution context. This is a piece of work that was done a couple of weeks ago. It's one of our musicians working online with a young person, and this is what it looks like.
Listen, it's still gonna be offbeat though. It don't matter, man. Just do your thing, innit? Nah, I'm tired and I'm restless. Everything out here, I've been defenseless. See, I'll come through, defenseless. Listen. See, I'm tired. More than the whip.
So you get the idea. That's quite typical of the work that we do at Noise Station. It's a producer paired with a young person to help them create whatever kind of music it is that they're into, that they want to make. Genuine co-production. We're never going in with a view of what we're going to do. We're going in with a question about what do you want to do as a starting point, and how can we help you make that, not pretending to be an expert in whatever that kid wants to make in terms of their music, but coming in as a genuine ally in terms of, I've got some skills, you've got some skills, let's go on a journey together. What we're also doing, as you can see, is capturing digitally a lot the highlights of each of those sessions. And what we're doing within every session that we do with Noise Solution is creating a digital diary of that work. As well, whether we're delivering face-to-face or whether we're delivering purely online, every participant and every musician are capturing the highlights, the successes of every session. Lots of reflection, something else you mentioned, Emily, encouraging people to reflect. The participant at the end of every session is to video, reflecting about their experiences of what worked and what didn't work and how that made them feel. I'll talk about a bit more about that in a moment. But what I'm going to do first is give you some reflections from some young people about the impacts that process of engaging them on their territory, helping them create something and make them feel good at something, and capturing that and fostering reflection and sharing that with the people around them that are important to them. These are the kind of impacts that you can get when that happens.
It was very bleak, and I really had no real picture of how life could or should be.
Leaving the house was just impossible. I didn't want people to look at me or see me or talk to me.
I didn't even know if I'd make it to my future. And then Noise Solution came along, and it was one of the best things of my life.
With the confidence I have now, I feel there is actually a future for me.
Without Noise Solution, I don't think I ever would have got into college. Definitely, it was one of the best experiences of my life.
Compared to how I was, I feel a lot more confident. The only worry I've got is, I've got all these opportunities, which ones do I pick?
So what we have to understand is, like, how did that happen? How did those kind of impacts occur just through making bleepy noises with kids in studios? You know, what's actually going on there? What's the theoretical underpinning of that? And when I talk about Noise Solution, I often state quite clearly that we are not a music organization. We are an organization that focuses on well-being and understanding what the feelings, what are the structures, what are the conditions we can put in place where we can allow well-being to flourish, because those are the outcomes you get when that occurs. And the evidence is unequivocal. When we talk about what happens when you impact genuinely on well-being, you will get improved engagement, you will get education outcomes that improve, you will get health outcomes that improve, you will get social outcomes that improve. And that means for young people, as you've just seen there, you get life-changing impacts, not just for them, but for their families as well, which also means you get significant impacts on services as well, as you remove the need for them through these often, not always by any means, but often transformational changes. I was very lucky. About 4 years ago, I was invited by Professor Pam Bernard at Cambridge University to go and do a 2-year research master's looking at well-being within a digital youth work context. Basically looking at noise pollution and why were we getting these results. And one of the most useful things that came out of it was coming across this self-determination theory, which for me, Emily, I live in a household with a child adolescent psychotherapist, Van der Kolk and Porges and, all these names that are constantly talked about. But yeah, for me, it's these two guys, DC and Ryan. And they developed self-determination theory. And I think what's interesting about self-determination theory is that culturally it's rooted in providing empirical evidence. Okay, so 40 years of academic teams, lab-tested experiments, real-world experiments, trying to find empirical evidence for how we impact on well-being and motivation. How do we shift people along this spectrum of being amotivated and demotivated, which is kind of a lot of the young people that we get referred to us, and how do we shift them towards this feeling of intrinsic motivation, of being excited about the world, of wanting to engage with it. And what they've tested for and proven in lots and lots of different ways is that there are psychological needs that need to be fulfilled for people to flourish, right? And again, this is one of those common sense ripples across theories, right? But what they've boiled it down to are we need to, whatever our intervention, create spaces where the people we work with experience a sense of autonomy. They have volitional choice in what's going on. They are not controlled by what's going on. You need to create spaces where people feel competent, like they have something to contribute. They don't feel incompetent. How demotivating is being made to feel incompetent? And they need to feel connected to other people. They need to experience the sense of relatedness, to feel valued by other people, or to express to other people that they value them. Okay, so these are the three things that kind of run like letters through rock for noise solution. That diagram is the thing that we push everything through, whether it's the work we do with young people, our communication with staff, how we build our IT infrastructure, how we design the interaction with that, communication with families, parents, professionals, all of it runs through that lens. Okay, when I talked a little bit earlier about my experiences in local authority and this focus on deficits that you see all the time, if you think about it within this context, if you've got a young person whose behaviors are being flagged and a professional's coming in and saying, well, you're rubbish at that and you're not doing that properly and I'm the expert and you listen to me and we'll fix you, what you're doing is removing any sense of autonomy as a knee-jerk reaction, and you're also undermining any sense of competence that they might have. And I think that's a massive issue. I'm not saying we don't need to talk about and examine deficits and issues that are going on, but we've got to balance it out as well with these strengths-based narratives, these spaces where you allow kids to feel that they are good at something rather than continually telling them that they're crap at everything. So that's the theory. In terms of how we actually map that to noise solution, autonomy supportive relationships are very, very much at the key of that. So we enculture our musicians to engage the young people they're working with a sense of curiosity. Emily, again, another echo, and to ask what they're into. All of the academic evidence, whether it's education or mentoring or clinical mental health work, says that the number one indicator of success of any of those things is the relationship you have with the person you're working with. If that doesn't work, it doesn't matter how good your model is. It's not going to work. We've all had rubbish teachers, me included, who made us feel this big and made us feel really incompetent, and we didn't feel liked, but it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We've all had those experiences. Alternatively, we've all had those teachers who made eye contact with us, believed in us, told us we were good at something. Those are the teachers that have the impact and send us off on a trajectory somewhere else. And that's kind of what we're trying to hothouse. So we see young people for about 20 hours, normally over 10 weeks. And we do that in the home or in the studio, sometimes a bit of both. And now we're able to also deliver entirely digitally, as you saw in that little bit of film earlier. This is about competence. This is autonomy. This is about using, for us, music technology to create a sense of competence really, really quickly. You saw how that kid in that bit of film had put that backing track together online, co-produced with his music mentor, Saran. This is the moment where you make them feel good at something, and technology sidesteps all of those issues around scales and notation, or we're not interested in any of that. Sorry, completely unapologetic. I don't care. I'm just not interested in that. I, as a professional musician for 25 years who toured the world, had multiple record contracts, I never read a note, still don't. I'm not saying one is better than the other as a way of working. I'm just saying they're different and they're equally as valid. So for us, it's much more about the quick win. And finding ways to use technology to make that kid feel that they've created something authentic and great for them in the moment as quickly as possible. And they can learn about theory and stuff later on. That's fine. So that's the autonomy and competence. But the other bit that I showed you briefly was this capturing of that competence and that project that they've autonomously developed. And what happens is, within every session, the musician and the participant post, as you would on any other social media platform. So using people's existing knowledge of how to engage with social media platforms, the musician within the session with the participant will capture video reflection of how the kid feels about the track that they've just made, or whatever it might be. And also the moment they did it, and text quotes of them saying things where they're reflecting that might be important to reflect on. And then the platform automatically pings out notification to whoever that young person has autonomously decided are the significant adults in their life. Who are the people they want to be seen by? Who are the people they're not being seen by, who it would really, really significantly impact on their lives if they were? So the young person invites in parents, carers, key workers, head of year, school teacher, whoever it is that is significant to them. And they're allowed into that secure feed that's just for that young person and the people they invite in. And each week it's updated within the session, projected onto those people's screens, and they're able to comment on it like they can with any other social media feed. So theoretically, from a self-determination perspective, we are externalizing for that young person that they are being competent at something, taking it outside of their head. There I am being good at something. Ah, excellent. The rest of the world's telling me I'm crap at everything, but there I am being good at everything, good at something. Oh, and here are these people commenting that I want to be seen by, validating me. Another reflection, another ripple that you were talking about, Emily, as well, that reflection, that validation. The comments they're seeing are the people they want to be seen by, validating them. Ah, so here I am being good at something. Oh, and here are these people whose opinions I value also telling me I'm good at something, which allows that kid to internalize those feelings, take them on board, challenge the perceptions and labels that they've given themselves or other people have been given them. But it also works the other way. You're also changing the perceptions of the people around that kid of what that young person is capable of. You're changing the conversations around that young person. It's not all about the deficits and what's going wrong. It's about a new story, a new narrative that young person is building about themselves. Here I am being good at something. Is the top. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a very quick 6-minute film, which kind of distills all of that, but it is more visual, and then starts to talk a little bit about how we've taken this use of digital, but also I think what doesn't get talked about very much in these kind of forums is how digital can be used on the back end of all these sessions to capture and analyze impacts, and also to take these theories around things like autonomy and competence and relatedness and build those into how we engage with everybody else. And how do we automate all of that stuff? that's the stuff that I think isn't talked about very much. So I'll start, if I've got time, I'll talk a little bit about that as well, and how we capture wellbeing impacts and demonstrate the efficacy of the approach.
Noise Solution is a top 100 performing UK social enterprise, a digital youth work organisation that to date, since March, has delivered over 1,700 hours of interactive online one-to-one music mentoring with vulnerable youth over lockdown. I wanted to catch people up on how our digital developments are helping us achieve this. In this video, we're going to hear from a participant and a parent about their experiences of our cloud-based platform. After that, we'll look at how we've developed that single cloud-based platform for every digital need the organisation has, and we'll briefly look at how our digital cloud helps us track the impact of all that we do. Phew, pretty ambitious for a few minutes. Every participant Noise Solution is referred is paired with a music mentor, where together they co-design a music project. We help them make whatever music they want to. Every session, whether online or face-to-face, participant and musician use a variety of technology to experience quick wins in creating their chosen genre. During each session, the digital highlights of that week's music mentoring journey are captured, and after the session, they are automatically shared safely, digitally, in their own private Noise Solution story, where family members and key workers are encouraged to comment. If you want to find out why this is useful, head to the website and look at our video on self-determination theory. Here's a quick participant and parent reflection of their experiences of this process.
Noise Solution began with Simon, my tutor, coming to my house, and we just sort of sat down and he spoke to me about what it is I like about music and what I want to do. Then we began working with the MIDI keyboards and stuff just to sort of mess around and jam. Really had a nice time. Like that to me, that was just like hanging out with friends. Sharing those videos was really important to me. And my mum, she was really almost surprised but happy to be able to see where I am at, because I feel that those videos are a much better measure of my mental well-being than me coming home from work and not doing the dishwasher. It's just so important to me that she sees that.
I really enjoyed watching the videos. I found them sort of a bit eye-opening, really. You know, often he doesn't share information with me. He's not terribly open. I'm sure other teenagers are the same. It's part of the process of actually growing up and kind of cutting that umbilical cord. And I expected that. But when I actually watched the videos, it sort of helped me kind of understand a bit more about where he was at. I was really amazed at seeing him smile and laugh and joke about, you know, because those are the things that kind of got a bit lost when he was quite poorly.
Pre-pandemic, as with Foulkes, these stories or private social media feeds captured the highlights of live sessions, but then COVID hit. Post-pandemic, it was clear we also had a platform that could help us deliver sessions digitally as well. Okay, but what does that entirely digital delivery look like? Side note, we've set things up with our platform so that it integrates with Zoom. Every time a musician books in an online session, it automatically creates a unique Zoom link for each session. That link is available to the participant within their feed 10 minutes before a session starts, so it's entirely secure. Over Zoom, the participant and musician use browser-based music and video creation tools, essentially a recording studio that they just need Chrome to use, to create together interactively. And as before, they share the results to their feed to be commented on by their family and key workers, who interact with it in exactly the same way as they did with the feed previously. Zoom's interactive annotation means musicians can easily direct learners from their respective browsers wherever they are, and the participant is entirely in control of their music. This same collaborative process is also used to create videos, using software called Rotor, again, with the results shared on the participant's Noise Solution feed. Check out this recent video that was made. For the last 5 years, we've been developing everything digital that Noise Solution does to sit on one single cloud-based platform. That's nice, Simon, but what does that actually mean? The platform is multi-facing, as well as acting as a front end, capturing and sharing sessions, or helping deliver sessions. It's also our website that's easily updatable. It performs all our admin tasks, much of it automated. For example, sending invite emails to set people up in the platform, delivering video messages to the right people to onboard them. It's our referral route for professionals. It automatically tracks those referrals so that we know that they're acted upon quickly. It allows musicians and mentors to book and manage their sessions easily and remotely. It tracks delivery and attendance, with musicians able to do that remotely. It collects NHS wellbeing scale data from within the participants' feed. It delivers video training to staff or participants. It analyses the wellbeing data it collects in real time. On our organisational dashboard, we can see the results of start and end questionnaires that participants fill in from their feeds. These are analysed using academic methodologies, and we can cut and dice this data at will. Of the last 200 participants we worked with, 47.78% reported low levels of wellbeing pre-noise solution. Post-intervention, that figure dropped to just 26%. Those wellbeing outcomes translate to direct financial savings for families and services. In 2019, we were lucky enough to have been lent a team of 5 independent international health data analysts from the private sector. They conducted a deep dive into the financial impacts of our work. It took them 8 months, and the only thing we requested was that they be conservative in their estimates. We didn't want to falsely inflate any claims. They came back with a figure of 334% savings for family and services, with 190% of those savings being upfront in the first year. What does that mean in real terms? Well, for every pound spent on noise solution, at a very conservative estimate, we see savings for family and services of £3.34. We're tripling any investment in us.
So this is the bit I'm really actually excited about in a very, very nerdy way, right? The work with young people is amazing, great. From an organizational perspective, getting better at this stuff in the background makes those outcomes more likely to happen. And I think digital tools are massively underused, misunderstood, or poorly implemented. And people are often they're not thinking about it from a digital perspective. They're often trying to replicate systems that they already had in place in a digital format, whereas we need to think about it differently. By that, I mean, there's a lot of development going on in the background for noise solutions. So we decided that wellbeing was the thing that was most important to us as an organization. So we found a wellbeing scale that we liked. There is no perfect way to measure wellbeing, by the way, before anyone sort of asks that question. It's a subjective reflection. It just is. But the one we use is the Warwick and Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale. It's been used somewhere in the excess with answers to that scale collated. Something like the sample size is something like 60,000 responses to that scale, which means we can do some detailed work around what low levels, moderate levels, and high levels of well-being are academically. We can also have a national benchmark of well-being from the UK that we can compare what we're doing against. We're not making scales up. We've got some solid evidence that we can compare what we're doing against. So we built that into the participants feed. It's just a tab, and they fill out 7 questions at the start of a set of sessions and 7 at the end. That's it. That's the only thing they do that isn't making music. As far as they're concerned, it's co-produced fun, as we talked about earlier. But for us as an organization, that means we've suddenly then got the ability to look demographically and in terms of gender and all sorts of other metrics around, well, what's the actual impact we're having? So it turns out noise solution is most effective within the 16 to 24-year-old age range, and is twice as effective with young women as we are with young men. Who knew? So we get perceived as an organization that makes drill music with young men in hoods, externalizing their behaviors, but actually young women internalizing behaviors, often trying to fade into the background, not be noticed. If you give those young women an opportunity to be creative around technology, the impacts on well-being are enormous. They are starting from a lower well-being point to begin with. But still, the evidence is there. And if you've got the evidence, when you go into commissioning conversations with other organizations or politicians or whoever it might be, you're in a much better place than going, well, we think it works. So the platform, allows us to have this data at our fingertips live. Okay, so every time somebody fills out one of those questionnaires, it gets added to this data set, and we can interrogate it by age, by gender, by whether we've delivered online or not. It'll compare the start and end scores in maths, and it'll also compare them against the national average. It'll do a whole bunch of statistical analysis. One of the other things it'll do automatically is look for statistical significance, which is a very complicated, scary term for basically understanding what's the probability if I feed somebody into this process, when they come out the other end, we'll see an increase in well-being. I won't go into the methodology of that at the moment. Suffice to say that there's a very, very high confidence level, 95% confidence level that you need to be aiming for, and it's looking for a probability score. If the probability score, this P, is lower than 0.5 or within that other 5% there, then you can say you are statistically significant. We've run 3 years of data on this, and consistently we've come in at P.0001. The lower the score, the better. It's massively statistically significant and has been for years. But there's so much more that's going on. There's safeguarding, oversight. We have complete control over that via this platform. This is an email I get every morning. After every music session, like the one you saw with Saran delivering with that young man, the musician writes a short report, a couple of paragraphs about what worked and what didn't work. I get a synopsis of every one of those that happened the day before, dropped into my email at the beginning of every day, and I can one click and I'm into that young person's digital story, and I can see what's actually happening. Complete oversight. At the point the musician writes that, they also have the ability to flag any safeguarding concerns. Immediately alerts us, the senior leadership team, and we can be on it like that. And it sets up a whole bunch of time boundary processes around safeguarding as well, so nothing falls through the gaps. There's lots of other automation. This sort of map in the background here is all the automatic processes that happen. So when that musician's report is written, musician hits a button and it automatically gets copied to whoever the referring professional is. So whether that's a mental health worker or a school teacher, they're immediately kept up to date. Communication is key, and they have the ability to, again, dive into that young person's blog, comment, so that that young person sees them and hears from them, ideally. But we're also using it to, when we sign somebody up, send emails with video onboarding instructions automatically. And this depends on whether they sign up as a parent or as a participant or as a professional. They get different messages depending on what their roles are, and they're onboarded automatically. We're doing stuff like playing with personalized videos. So when the participant logs in for the first time, the first thing they see is a video from their musician, literally name checking them, going, "Hi, I'm John. Really nice to meet you, Simon. I'm really, really looking forward to our sessions. This is what we're going to do," using this human contact and just trying to remove all the friction from the engagement and do all the things you can to make sure that participant gets to that first session. We're also using that platform for training as well. So we've built a whole HR process whereby when new musicians are inducted, they get stepped through about 2.5 hours of noise solution training around self-determination theory, how to use the platform, what happens. And it's always at their fingertips. When they log in to their version of the platform as a noise solution musician, it's all there at their fingertips. One of the things I'm really interested in at the moment, and I realize I'm going to have to wrap up in a minute, but one of the things I'm really, really interested in at the moment is all of this data, these beautiful, rich, qualitative stories, where you have all this fabulous data where these participants are talking about their experiences and the impacts that it has. That's a treasure trove of information, but really, really difficult to get at. You can't wade through the video. It's just not possible. It works in terms of it's projected onto adults who are interested in that young person. Mum's probably going to watch it, or whoever else has been invited, the teacher, if they know it's a useful thing, are probably going to watch it. But what about on a bigger scale? What else can we do with that data? What we've started building into the platform now, and what we're working towards, are using things like AI and sentiment analysis. So we've got a working model at the moment whereby this is a transcription of a session, and it's doing a simple sentiment analysis. Is what's being said positive, neutral, or negative? So we've got somebody says here good, sorry, and the computer, the AI engine, whatever you want to call it, has decided that half of that is positive and half of that is negative. Fair enough. Somebody said, good here. Right, yeah, 100% positive. Lovely. That's a very simplistic picture of what's going on. But it can look at whole conversations and tell you if sentiment is high or sentiment is low or it's neutral. And over time, you can start to track how things are going. You've got this 360-degree building evidence block of qualitative and quantitative data at the same time, giving you a perfect picture of what's occurring, which is unbelievably powerful. The next step, and we're actively working on this, is to be able to take somebody's feed and all the rich data that's within that, and rather than just sentiment analyzing it, actually linguistically analyze it as well, automatically. So basically extract all the audio from the video of that young person's feed, and try to get it to recognize autonomy or competence or relatedness, these pillars of self-determination theory, and recognize where it is and it isn't happening, and then automatically reacting to that. So using the automation features of the platform to send the right video message to the right person to say, you're the social worker, you haven't logged in. You know, we know that if you log in and create a sense of that young person feeling competent, then your job's probably going to be a bit easier. You know, that's a simplistic version of the message, but that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're taking it at the moment. And that's what this is at the moment. This is me breaking down sentence by sentence by sentence and tagging what's autonomy supportive and what's autonomy frustrating, or competence supportive or competence frustrating, and giving the platform basically a dictionary of what self-determination looks like within a noise solution context, so the platform can recognize it and automatically analyze it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on within that platform, within the back end, making it easier to function, better functioning. It's doing a massive amount of heavy lifting for us as an organization. It's making reporting unbelievably easy for us because everything's at our fingertips. And it's just, I get quite emotional about how exciting it is. You know, this is very early stages of something that's, you know, bringing all of this beautiful rich data together for social outcomes, to improve social outcomes, to improve people's lives, not just the kids but their parents and the key workers that work with them as well. But it's intelligent, and it's feeding in all of this data, broad mixed method approach, so that you can demonstrate validity and impact of what we're doing, whether it's well-being data that's validated and quantitative, or these beautiful rich qualitative stories at scale. I mean, it's really powerful to be able to think, right, if I want to look at the statistical significance and range of change of well-being on 17 to 25-year-old young women referred to me from mental health teams, I can do that at the touch of a button. But I can also dive into any one of those data points, otherwise known as a person, and show you their story, told by them, from their mouth, their reflections, with the co-production of their family and their key workers. We can link the impacts on well-being using that scale to cost savings as well. We can make cost projections about the impact of the work at scale as well. The other thing that I was playing around with earlier, which just amused me, and I thought this was just funny, was we're also really interested in VR. This was literally me in the office about 3 hours ago, putting together a way of using VR to have those sessions. So making beats using the browser-based software, so sharing the browser between two VR headsets and creating beats in a space. What I'm interested in there is taking away this disconnect that we have on Zoom, placing that young person somewhere else in the country, in a room digitally with a musician, so you're in the same space, creating as well, having fun. You know, and the piece of software you're using is like 50 foot tall, and you're pointing lasers at it. It's honestly, it's unbelievable. It's really exciting. So that's kind of some of the areas that we're heading towards with this. In terms of, you know, the impacts that we're actually having, you know, with our population of young people who are generally referred because, you know, other organizations are finding they can really struggle to engage with that young person. We're seeing 71% completion 88% attendance, 40% re-engagement with education, employment, training, voluntary placements, 80% continuing with their music making, 3 years of statistically significant impacts on well-being, 61% of that population finishing at or within 2 points, a meaningful 2 points of that national average well-being scale. And as I said, we know if we impact on well-being, we know it's evidenced, unequivocal, we get better education, health, social engagement outcomes. There we go.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'm always so struck by the sort of, by how effectively you use data. I think in music education, we're collecting data a lot, but, you have such an incredible approach to really demonstrating the impact through that data. And it's always really great to hear you talk about it. We've got a question from Elizabeth, who has said, do the young people who have been through the programme continue their relationship with Noise Solution afterwards?
Some do, some don't. It varies quite a lot, to be honest. We do keep in touch. The idea behind it was always for it to be a short-term intervention to change levels of motivation. So what we do focus on are, within those sessions, identifying what the progression route looks like for the young person. In terms of, there's very little point in us just going and having 10 weeks and having a lovely time and then disappearing. That's useless. What we want to be able to do is allow the young person to identify what their preferred progression route is within the session, just in conversation. What do you want to go and do? What are you interested in when this does finish? What do you want to go and do? And then using that within the communication with the professionals to say, right, Johnny wants to do level 1 maths, right? Can you make sure that by week 8, that's in place, so that when we finish this motivation shift that we've changed, where you were saying you couldn't get him to do anything and now he's identified that he wants to go and do this, can you make sure that happens? It's not ideal, doesn't always work, let's be real about it, but it does work surprisingly well as well in terms of those progression routes. Progression's been massively difficult within lockdown, obviously. That's been a huge issue, so it's something we're going to focus on again in the next few months. But yes, do they stay with us? Not really, but they're not intended to. It's supposed to be about changing motivation and getting them somewhere else and doing something else and continuing that trajectory that was doing this and hopefully is now doing that.
Thank you. I mean, I had a question which was around whether you see any different indicators of well-being in the online remote activity to when you do or when you could do face-to-face activity. Does anything different come through in terms of those indicators?
I'm doing a paper at the moment with a friend about what are the differences in well-being impacts. The early indicators are that we're seeing the same level of statistical significance and impact on well-being. I think we're seeing it with different children. Not everybody wanted to go online. There were lots of young people who just said, no, we'll wait until this is all over and then we'll pick it up. And we're just starting to do that now. But equally, there are loads of kids we weren't able to get anywhere near before who love doing it online. So it's been fascinating. So, I mean, that will absolutely, going forward, we'll be doing both. And the different, I haven't seen any differences in, we haven't got enough scale, I would say, in the online data to make any sort of proclamations about differences at this point. But the early indicators are that we're having the same impact in terms of impact on well-being. It is as much as I can say. It's remained statistically significant.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to comment on or reflect on from Simon's talk?
I just want to know how we can all have your system.
You can, as it happens. So one of the things we're working towards at the moment is making that a licensable product. We're about 4-6 months away. So yes, that is possible.
Simon, what's the youngest age that you've used it with?
7 is the youngest, but that's an outlier. So the wellbeing data, when we look at it at scale, tells us that impacts on wellbeing really, really drop off below 11. And it's actually only validated down to 11 as well. So that's kind of correlates. But yes, if a school contacts us and they've got a young person and they really, really want to do it, then of course we'll do it. We're not going to exclude anyone. So yeah, 7 is the youngest, 60 is the oldest. So yeah, those human needs of, you know, autonomy, competence, and relationships, they're universal culturally, you know, geographically, anywhere, you know, that they're evidence to be present in human experience. So yeah, it works across the board.
I've got quite a big final question for both of you, because we're nearly at the end. It's been such a fantastic webinar, thank you. But that's just from your perspective, what would you like to see next happen in the music education sector with supporting children and young people's mental health and well-being through music, whether that's remotely, whether it's through hybrid models, whether it's face-to-face? I just would really value getting your sort of expert opinions on what you'd like to see happen, either more of, less of, over the next few years.
I'd like to see a change in political will. I think the messaging that's coming out at the moment is hugely unhelpful, to say the least. I think there is a growing understanding that not everything can be fixed by a pill. You know, the push towards social prescribing demonstrates that, but the way it's been delivered and framed is all around providing signposters at GP surgeries without providing any funding for the people actually delivering the work, which is pointless. So there is still a massive undervaluing of the professionalization of the work that Emily does. And when you've got Gavin Williamson saying the stuff that he's saying, you know, you can see that that's coming top down.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily, what about you?
Yeah, just to pick up the point about social prescribing, that we've been working with our adult work with social prescribing for about 5 years. And although you're quite right, Simon, it's like having a travel agent but no holidays. You know, it's tricky. We've had to raise our own funds for it, but they've been incredibly supportive. So might offer in-kind support like a venue, or sending letters or text messages to patients, you know, to help attract them and refer them into the programme. So there are other kind of ways that they've been able to support. Children and young people's social prescribing is growing, and we've just become part of a pilot in Cornwall that's a coalition. So it's a coalition of youth organisations, or organisations that work with children and young people, not just music or the arts, but we've put together a bid to our CCG that's a kind of a model that they can buy in through a coalition, so that we're not all kind of banging on the door, because that's the thing, is about sort of having a consolidated approach, because CCGs and the social prescribing is just that they're getting shouted at from all directions, because I think it's been so heightened, hasn't it, the kind of the expectations around social prescribing, and so now there's this kind of massive expectation, and I think everybody's going to be sort of trying to get involved in it, and like Simon says, the funding is you know, it's not necessarily there. So I think it would be really interesting to see how this coalition model, you know, how it moves forward, whether we do actually successfully get any referrals from this and funding from the CCG.
Yeah, we have quite a good relationship with our CCG, and fingers crossed we're about to start a whole stream of work with neurodiverse young people, and we're quite lucky in that the senior leadership within that CCG are very on board with the third sector and are seeing us as equal partners, which is massively unusual. And I think the sector needs to get better at that. Stop being this sort of cap in hand, please can you help us? It's got to stop. You know, not all professionals wear suits. You know, we are really good. Noise Solution is saving the local CCG £1 million a year. You know, and we need to shout about that kind of thing a lot more.
Absolutely. I remember I got the attention of a GP when I actually laid out to him that in our Singing for Lung Health group, we'd had 3 people stopping using an inhaler, and just the cost saving of that funds the group. And you could see him just go, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Although having said that, I've also been in meetings with kind of senior leadership teams at local authorities, and they've gone, yeah, it's brilliant, we love the work, we can see you save us loads of money, we can, you know, see the outcomes for the young people and the parents, we'd love to commission you, but we can't, because if we commission you, we're going to have to sack these social workers. You know, that there are finite funds, and those sort of local government organizations that, you know, that's only going to get worse over the next few years. You know, it's been steadily reducing for many years, but that's not going to change anytime soon. So yeah, even if you've got all the data and all the social return on investment stuff, yeah, there are still limitations.
Yeah, well, on that positive note,
sorry.
it was great. I think we'll draw the webinar to a close now, because we're bang on our end time. But I just want to thank Emily and Simon so much. You've shared so much wisdom and knowledge and expertise, and also given some real sort of practical insights that people can take away. And, you know, and it's been useful to talk about what next, because, you know, I think that there are some really big issues that the music education sector needs to address over the next few years, and you've outlined them really well. And, you know, and even though it can feel a bit doom and gloom with funding and politics, there's still some really fantastic work going on at grassroots level, which you two have both demonstrated absolutely brilliantly. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who's attended and participated, and also a huge thanks to the NIMAS team, who are doing a brilliant job with this festival and making sure that everything's happening smoothly in the background. So that's the end of the webinar. Enjoy the rest of your Thursdays, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.